Is it a fact that Jesus' death caused the disciples to despair and lose hope, believing that his life had ended?
Well, we are told, in fact, and it's a very unflattering picture, that the 12 denied, deserted, betrayed, abandoned him. We're told very clearly that's true in regard to the male disciples, the 12. We are not told that about the female followers of Jesus. They were last at the cross, first at the tomb, and the first to see the risen Lord. Now, here we are in the midst of a first-century patriarchal culture. The likelihood that early Christians promulgating an evangelistic religion would make up the idea that the essential 12 apostles had been with Jesus all along, denied, deserted, and betrayed him. But on the other hand, the women who were risen disciples of Jesus, they were there at the cross, at the tomb, and they were the first to see the risen Lord. The idea that in a patriarchal culture you would make up women as the primary witnesses to that crucial triad, died, buried, was risen, is just so historically implausible that it just, it's beyond belief.
Is it a logical conclusion that a few days later, the tomb in which Jesus was buried was discovered to be empty?
Well, all the evidence that we have suggests it was. Even the indirect evidence. Let's go back to that phrase again in 1 Corinthians 15. He died, he was buried, and on the third day he rose. Now, to a Jew who believed in resurrection, it was a bodily resurrection. It wasn't some sort of spiritual event that didn't involve the body. When you go through the sequence, died, buried, was raised, this necessarily implies the body isn't in the tomb anymore. So we have even an indirect piece of evidence to the empty tomb in the Pauline tradition.
So what you're saying is that if the Jesus Seminar wants to object to the kind of resurrection, now you're bypassing the Jewish culture which was stating that.
Exactly. Part of the problem here is taking 20th century ideas anachronistically and predicating them of first century people. And that's not good historiography either. Whether you agree with what first century people believed or not is neither here nor there. The question is, did they believe this, and did they present the evidence in this sort of fashion that resurrection was a bodily thing? Well, yes, they did.
Is it a fact that the disciples had experiences which they believed were literal appearances of the risen Jesus? Do most critical scholars accept that as a fact?
All right. Now, this is where it becomes to get a little fuzzy. Some people want to talk about the appearances of Jesus as visions. And what the word vision connotes to a 20th century person is some kind of subjective impression in the back of your cerebral cortex that doesn't necessarily correspond with anything objective out there and reality beyond your own head. When a first century person talked about visions, they did not necessarily mean something radically subjective like that. They meant seeing something that was real, apart from your own psyche, that was out there that you hadn't previously seen. That's normally what the word vision means. It's a revelation of a reality that's beyond yourself that you hadn't noticed or hadn't been unveiled to your eyes before. Most scholars would certainly say the disciples believed that they saw Jesus. And many of them would just want to leave it there and say, okay, it was a subjective phenomena that happened here. But if you interpret those gospel documents about the resurrection appearances of the risen Lord, and you interpret the Pauline evidence and the rest of the New Testament evidence, they were claiming far more than that. They were claiming to actually have a physical encounter with Jesus after his death, that he ate, that he was tangible, could be touched, that he was still moving in space and time as a real person. So they were claiming more than just having had a vision of Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because a drunk can say that he's seeing pink elephants, and he probably is. That doesn't mean they're there. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference here? They believed it, but how do you know they were actually seeing something?
Well, in terms of the psychological profile of the disciples, if we believe that it is true that they denied, deserted, and betrayed Jesus, that they had given him up for lost when he died on the cross, Psychologically, something significant had to have happened to change all of their minds about this particular issue after the crucifixion of Jesus. Because remember, no early Jews were looking for a crucified Messiah. That would be, if you wanted to scotch the rumor that Jesus was Messiah, get him crucified, that would prove that he was cursed, not blessed by God, not the anointed one of God. So here they are, completely shattered. Their world has been turned upside down. They've spent the last year, 2 years, 3 years of their life apparently for nothing following Jesus. What was going to change that opinion? Something from outside of themselves had to impact them like a sledgehammer hitting them over the head to change their mind about the fact that Jesus was dead and gone. Something dramatic had to have happened. Martin Debelius, a German scholar, once said, you need to posit an X big enough between the death of Jesus and the birth of the early church to explain the connection. If you don't posit an X big enough, then you haven't explained the